Leaders from France, Russia and the United States have toured Africa in recent times to promote diplomatic relations with key players on the continent. Experts claim there has never been a more fierce fight for influence in Africa since the Cold War. Last week, Newzroom Afrika spoke to Phillip Dexter about an opinion piece where he states that the South African media has been captured by neoliberal forces. Now, let's take a look at this.
Journals and newspapers, they're fundamentally focused on two things. One is on bringing down the ANC as a government and ensuring that, it gets below 50% in the next election. And secondly, attacking socialist and left formations. I mean, we've seen the brutal attacks on NUMSA, for example, trying to overthrow the current leadership of the trade union. And I think all of these organizations have a history of meddling in the politics of other organizations. And if one looks at their funding, although there are fronts to that funding, once you trace back as to where the funding comes from, it's usually things like the Soros Foundation and the U.S. State Department through the National Endowment for Democracy and so on.
Now, joining us is Micah Reddy from Amabhungane, one of the publications that were accused by Phillip Dexter with regards to the meddling of the Western world with regards to the South African media. Micah, thank you so much for joining us and thank you for your time. Now, Phillip Dexter has made some scathing accusations against a number of media houses. There's been a couple of responses with News 24 saying that these are spurious, fantastical claims that are laughable at best. What is Amabhungane's response to this?
I think we would echo that. There are a number of allegations that Dexter has made, but let's sort of separate them out and first deal with this claim that there's some sort of hidden editorial agenda. Amabhungane has been around for more than a decade. Our archive is available online, and our reporting record. Any of your viewers could go and trawl through our archives, and even the most cursory glance at our reporting over the years will give lie to Dexter's claims that we're sort of attacking the ANC or have some sort of anti-left agenda. It's absurd. We have covered private sector corruption. We have provided some of the most hard-hitting exposés on private sector corruption, including corruption involving U.S. corporates, consultancy companies, banks, Steinhoff, for instance. We've covered all major political parties across the political spectrum. I know that Dexter was very irked by our coverage of NUMSA. He does appear to be very close to one particular faction of NUMSA. Our reporting of NUMSA was in response to events. We were just doing our jobs in covering what is a highly fractious environment within the union, that the level of internal dissent and factionalism has been on open display recently. We saw, for instance, at the NUMSA Congress, a mass walkout. NUMSA members have taken their own leadership to court and have won in court. But in Dexter's view, this is unfair that we're accurately covering events. He would rather us shy away from covering important events. I believe that the unions have a very influential role in South African politics and need to be covered more extensively.
But Mika, among some of the other accusations that Dexter has made, he has spoken of funding from the US aid to Amabhungane and all the other entities as well, and he speaks of a stream of cash from US intelligence networks so that these publications are stenographers of the US propaganda machine. What's your response to that?
Well, firstly, Dexter has repeated multiple lies, despite the fact that we have pointed the truth out to him. He has knowingly repeated a lie. That is that the U.S. State Department or the National Endowment for Democracy, which is tied to the U.S. state, have given money to Amabhungane. We do not accept money from any governments, and we do not accept money even from entities that could be seen to be fronts or proxies for governments. Yet he continues to repeat this lie. It is a demonstrable lie. Our funding information is available online. Any of your viewers can go onto our website and see who funds us and how much they give. And for the record, we don't accept more than 20% from any single institutional donor, and that's to safeguard our own independence. In fact, Richard Pitthouse, formerly of Newframe, the former editor of Newframe, wrote an article in which he made a similar accusation that we had taken money from the National Endowment for Democracy, and he had to, that had to be retracted because it was demonstrably false. Like I said, our information is available online. We are extremely transparent in our funding. But, Dexter has taken a note from the propagandist playbook. He is repeating this lie over and over again. And it is completely dishonest. There is also some important context here because, Dexter could easily have established the truth if he wanted to, but this was not some attempt to get at the truth, not any sort of sincere attempt to, better understand the media environment or imperialism for that matter. Dexter is responding to an article that we wrote that followed the closure of Newframe and that detailed a network around a single funder, a whole lot of organizations directly tied to a single funder, an individual, with demonstrable links to the Chinese Communist Party. And we named Dexter. He came up in the article relatively peripherally, but that explains his really shrill responses in the form of, the interview he gave to Newzroom last week and various publications online. And it is classic deflection. It is because, it's what Zuma and the Guptas did, which is, point fingers elsewhere, make broad and sweeping conspiratorial claims about U.S. capture. And they really, they stem from his completely hackneyed Cold War era view of the world in which the West is this sort of monolithic bogeyman, and any media organization that has any sort of association with any sort of Western entity is deemed to be some sort of puppet of Western imperialism.
And on that
it's
note,
all very crude.
Right. He did make some of those accusations with regards to either being pro-West or pro-East. Let's listen in on that, and then you and I will continue the discussion from there.
If one goes back through the 1960s, in the Vietnam War, if you look at the whole period of anti-colonial struggles, the West, and in particular the US, and to some extent the UK, funded various organizations to try and either sway people's opinion against socialism or communist parties, and to manufacture an agenda that democracy and the free market are the only way that people can achieve any kind of development in their country. It now today manifests itself in this anti-China and anti-Russia propaganda. And again, I'm not taking sides in something like the Ukraine war, but the reality is the US and NATO surrounded Russia with nuclear weapons and then expected Russia to sit idly by. I always use the example that if Russia was to put nuclear weapons in Mexico, the Americans would bomb them back into the Stone Age.
So, Micah, he makes mention of the manufacturing of a reality through controlling the narrative, and that being essential to imperialism, like you also mentioned earlier on, and that for South Africa, truly it means that the path for electoral dismantling of the ANC-led government is what the Amabhungane as well as News 24 is working towards, and it's either you're picking a side, you're either pro-East or pro-West. What's your response to that?
Well, I mean, again, he's sort of, jumping around from Cold War era, interference to the current day and speaking in absolutely sweeping, generalized terms. There's no kind of specificity here. He cannot, in the case of, supposed media capture in South Africa, he cannot demonstrate any sort of effect or outcomes in terms of, say, pro-imperialist narratives or hidden agendas. And that's because it doesn't really exist. It exists in Dexter's head. And like I said, it's kind of very crude, conspiratorial, Cold War era analysis. It is trite that global powers will try and interfere in the internal affairs of other countries, will try and influence media narratives in underhanded ways, etc. This is not something that is the preserve of America. We've seen a similar thing with China and Russia. And it's something that absolutely should be written about and should be exposed. But, Dexter's various attacks on on what he calls the liberal media in South Africa is completely disingenuous. It's not really about exposing anything. Like I said, it's about deflection, and it's it's totally political. By his measure, pretty much any independent media outlet in a resource-scarce continent like Africa is guilty of being complicit in Western imperialism just by accepting, dollars or euros or whatever the case may be. And by that measure, you could say an organization like The Intercept, and in fact, in one of the articles written by his associates, The Intercept is named. And The Intercept is this sort of fiercely anti-imperial radical publication in the States that receives money from a funder that may have some sort of connection to the U.S. government. But it's all very crude. I mean, we do work with regional partners, in terms of capacity building and that sort of thing. We have relationships with other media organizations in the region. And they may have slightly less kind of restrictive funding policies than we do. But we work with them precisely so that we can strengthen independent media, and so that we can help bring these organizations up to our position, where we're to make them less dependent, basically. Or less subject to the influences of commercial and political considerations. And surely that's something to be commended. I mean, in Dexter's view, we would, if we were to avoid his labels of being imperialist stooges, then we would all just have to, turn inwards and forget about the wider world. And it's quite absurd, really, when you see it for what it is.
Micah, I have run out of time. I just wanted to quickly throw this in. Dexter does also make accusations of top-tier editors having meetings with the rich in Cape Town. Are you aware of such? Is this a lie?
No, it's a complete lie. And in fact, he uses it as the basis for his article in Common Dreams to imply that the media is captured just because Richard Pitthouse of Newframe was supposedly approached by the U.S. ambassador about a meeting. Well, we never had... It was the first time we were hearing of this meeting that called on the rocks off the record. It was the first time we were hearing about it. We weren't invited, let alone did we go. So no, it's again a complete lie. It's that simple.
All right, thank you so much for your time and for that response. That was Amabhungane investigative journalist Micah Reddy giving us his account, or rather the response from Amabhungane after the allegations made by Dexter with regards to South African media being captured. Now,